All right, everybody, I'm ready to get started. Welcome to the final lecture of the course. As I've been mentioning, we're not going to meet on Thursday, so this will be the last time we meet as far as me conveying new information to you. Thursday will be yours. You will have about a week and a half to prepare for the final for this class, so hopefully that extra time will serve a purpose for you. You'll actually make it worth something. So the final is a week from Thursday from 12:45 to 2:45 in this room. So just keep that in mind. I know all of you have a bunch of finals going on right now, or about to go on, and you probably have assignments and stuff due this week. Not the easiest time for you. Hang in there, like I've been saying. You got to always kind of have the big picture in your mind, like what is everything I need to take care of? How much time do I have to do everything? And if you kind of lay out a plan for yourself and you account for everything, then all you have to think about at any given moment is like what you're doing that day in that moment versus like the weight of every responsibility that's expected of you, which can be big. So hopefully you've done that. If you haven't done that, do it right now. You have some time still to be a little bit flexible, a little bit more than you'll be able to be next week with respect to your time and what you can do. So use it wisely. Hopefully this last weekend you did the same thing. You have to keep in mind that this will end. Like it will be over by the end of next week, all of it. And so everything that you do now is so important and it's so worth your time. And any kind of sacrifice you have to make for it is worth your time. It's worth it. So make sure that you guys do it and you have as much of a clear head as possible about it. Don't pull all-nighters next week. Don't do silly things like that, because if you work a lot and then like go to class and have barely slept, like that will affect your ability to just focus and remember the things that you studied, and it will actually work against everything that you've been working towards. So don't let that happen to you. Again, just kind of lay out a plan for yourself, stick to it, and it will be fine. It will work out for you. And if for whatever reason you falter and something does not work out, learn from it. Change your approach. Don't let it reflect badly on you and your own idea of what you're capable of. You simply have to acknowledge that you haven't quite figured out how to thrive in this kind of environment where, again, you have a large amount of information that you're expected to learn, and you really have to like crunch your time, like kind of push away the things that you want to do for the things that you have to do, and that's the sort of thing that takes practice to be able to achieve the right way, unless you've always been doing it that way, which is not the case for some folks. Like some people, like I've mentioned before, you just kind of survived through high school rather than actually took it on like head on and really thrived in that environment. And this, of course, is like the next step from that. Like it's another level of learning where you're expected to learn a lot more at a more sophisticated level, a lot more details being covered. That requires more time. It requires more dedication, and that again is something that you learn to do. Like and if you haven't learned to do that yet, you have to acknowledge to yourself that you have not done that, and that you need to start making it a point to learn how to do that by maybe taking a little bit less classes and then really devoting a lot of time to the classes that you do take, and then seeing how you can wind up with a really good result given the right amount of dedication. A lot of people just kind of want to shoehorn in classes, like just kind of squeeze them into your schedule, and the minimum that you try to do for the class should be enough, and it isn't, because there's inherent requirements to these classes that are bigger than your ability to kind of go around corners and take shortcuts. Like it's not possible. It is just not possible. And again, this is all about learning how to survive out there and ultimately thrive out there. The big opportunities, the ones that you want, the ones that will get you the resources, the benefits, the payoffs that we're all looking for out of life, they require the kind of dedication that you have to show here. And if you're not showing it here and you don't know how to do it, and you just like kind of get through here, then once you get out there, you're not going to be successful in the way that you want to be successful, because the people that are successful at the level you want to be successful are dedicated 100% to what they're doing. They are sacrificing all the time. What they do is what they do, and everything else is what they do when they don't, when they're not like focusing on like the main thing that they've taken on in their life. So there's so much learning going on here that you don't even realize, and you have to let it happen, or else again, this will not mean much, and you will get out there with your degree, and people will say, "So what? So what? Like, you've got a degree, but you're not that person. You're not the person that should like have been sort of formed from like all these like challenging experiences, finals, exams, papers, projects, group work, all this stuff that's supposed to change you into that person that can get out there and thrive. Like, if you don't allow it to make you into that optimal type of folk, then it's just not going to happen. It's just not going to happen, and things aren't going to work out. And I want things to work out for you, and you need to want things to work out for you. And I know right now it's hard for you guys to be excited about anything, but like, it is exciting to like walk away from these experiences being successful. That really does provide you that positive reinforcement, that like elevating foundation to get you to that next level. And so it's so important that you guys don't let this experience kind of swallow you up, and just like kind of stay in the moment and figure out, okay, what am I doing today? What can I do to really succeed these last few days, so that again, I can walk away from the semester feeling like I've accomplished something, and letting it change you into the better person that you can be. And it's not that you're bad people now. It's just you have a lot of potential that's not actualized, and it needs to be sort of brought out of you, and that's what these experiences are about. So let it happen. Let it do it to you. Go home. Spend hours working, hour upon hour upon hour. Go to sleep. Wake up. Do the same thing. And if you do that, you'll be used to it. You'll know you can do it, and then the world will not be as challenging as it ultimately is for most people once you get out into it, and you will be able to elevate yourself to some level that's worthy of you, that's worthy of all the work that you put in to get through college and into the world with that degree. All right, folks, we are going to finish off the course today. So we're finishing off chapter 16, and then we'll finish off chapter 17, which is not that huge. But again, we're dealing with the last cases of market failure. The first case of market failure is something we've been tracking since the last exam, which is the ability of firms to charge above their marginal costs, and that's their market power. And again, it comes from monopolies, it comes from oligopolies, and it comes from monopolistic competition. But markets can also fail in other ways. We talked about it last time. If there are negative externalities, so negative impacts from market transactions that aren't accounted for by firms, that is a way that the market fails. And another way is that the good itself, the thing that is being bought and sold, is not of the right nature for markets to allocate it properly. And that's the last thing we'll talk about today. So chapter 16, we'll finish off what we've been talking about with positive externalities, talk about network externalities, and then jump into chapter 17, where we'll talk about the goods that we've been talking about, which are private goods, and then discuss the other three types of goods that have different characteristics than the goods that can properly be allocated by markets, which are public goods, common resources, and artificially scarce goods. Both chapter homeworks are already available to be completed, so by the time you're done today, I would suggest jumping online, getting those done, and then just being done with all the homeworks, and then starting your preparation for studying for the final for this course. Are there any questions about anything before I move forward? As far as the conditions for the final, it's the same as the conditions for all the other exams. The only difference is that you'll have 2 hours versus an hour and 10 minutes. So bring a calculator, bring writing utensil, bring the Scantron. I'll send an email just to remind you, but there will be no surprises. It'll be very straightforward. All right, so previously, again, we started talking about externalities. external costs and benefits. So external cost is an uncompensated cost that an individual or firm imposes on others. External benefits are benefits that individuals or firms confer on others without receiving compensation. Both are called together externalities, with the external costs called negative externalities, and the external benefits called positive externalities. So the negative externality we focused on was pollution, and we talked about how we can analyze the optimal amount of pollution via our marginal analysis approach, where we have the marginal social cost of pollution. It's the additional cost imposed on society as a whole by an additional unit of pollution, and the marginal social benefit of pollution, the benefit to society of an additional unit of pollution. We can plot both of those with the marginal social costs increasing and the marginal social benefit decreasing, meaning again that higher levels of pollution. So we have pollution on the x-axis and marginal social cost and benefit on the y-axis. So more and more pollution sort of compounds and makes the costs to society more severe, which is why we have that positively sloped marginal social cost of pollution curve. And then we have the negatively sloped marginal social benefit of pollution. And the marginal social benefit is like the savings from not having to spend money cleaning that can be used to like produce. And so if the pollution is high, then the cost of cleaning an extra unit of pollution is not that high, and so the savings of it would not be that high, versus if pollution is low, cleaning an extra unit is costly because you're very close to eradicating all pollution. At that point, you have to use more expensive means to do so, and that's where that negatively sloped marginal social benefit of pollution curve comes from. That's the logic that underlies it. So as we talked about, if markets are left to their own devices, then they will pollute as much as they possibly can, which will be in this framework, this amount here, where their marginal social benefit is equal to 0. But marginal social cost will be high at that level. And so absent some means of negotiating so that society can compensate the individuals polluting for their cost to pollute, then the socially optimal amount will not be achieved. The socially optimal amount is this amount here, where the marginal social benefit equals the marginal social cost. And we talked about 3 different ways of achieving that level. And all of the ways that we talked about are public solutions, meaning the government institutes policies that will help us to get to that level, versus if we allow the markets to do so on their own. We talked about the Coase theorem. Ronald Coase basically established the idea that even in the presence of externalities, an economy can reach an efficient solution, provided that costs of making a deal are sufficiently low. So as long as there aren't many costs, which are called transaction costs, the cost of making deals, if those costs are not existent or not high, then private markets can deal with these negative externalities like pollution or noise pollution or things of that sort. And by doing so, they would internalize the externality. But in reality, that's not always easy. There are always going to be transaction costs to dealing with big problems like this. And so we talked about the policies toward pollution. We talked about how one approach can be environmental standards, in which are rules that protect the environment by specifying actions by producers and consumers. So the government can say, everybody can pollute a certain amount, and that would be the same across the board. Another thing that we can do is tax the emissions of polluters, and the optimal amount of the tax is the amount that would make the amount of an extra unit of pollution as costly to the firm as their marginal social benefit of an additional unit of pollution. And by charging them a tax, you essentially make extra units of pollution costly for them, And so then you can get them to this optimal point. The kind of tax that we would impose on polluters is called the Pigouvian tax. And the third kind of solution that we could have for pollution is to engage in a policy of tradable emissions permits, in which the government sets a level of pollution that is acceptable, and then basically distributes an even amount of licenses to all polluters, and then they trade amongst themselves depending on who has the highest or lowest cost of cleaning up pollution, in order to get the most amount of pollution reduced by those that have the lowest cost versus those that have the highest cost, and thereby achieving a similar result to the emission standards at a lower cost, essentially. And so we looked at, again, two firms that have different costs associated with cleaning up. So the MBA represents a firm that has a lower cost to cleaning than MBB. So the higher curve represents a marginal benefit of a firm who has more costly means of cleaning up. And we talked about how if the government imposed an environmental standard, that that is not efficient, because the marginal social benefit to each one would be different at the level at which they would be polluting, which means that like the one that has the lower cost to pollution would stand to pollute less than the one that has the higher cost, achieving the same amount, but again, less costly. And we achieve that over here via the emissions tax and the tradable permits, emissions permits. Both of those policies achieve a more efficient outcome than the environmental standard. So let's do a quick problem to kind of just highlight how that worked one last time. Suppose there's two plants that are emitting sulfur dioxide into the air and polluting the environment. One plant has a higher marginal benefit curve than the other. We're going to draw and label a graph illustrating the impact of imposing a uniform environmental standard on the two plants. And in a separate graph, we're going to show the effects of imposing an emission tax on the two plants. The question will be, which policy is more economically efficient and why? So to do this, we're going to need to, again, label our axes. The y-axis is the marginal benefit to individual polluters. The x-axis is the quantity of pollution in tons. One plant has a higher marginal benefit curve than the other. So there's the higher marginal benefit curve, and here's the lower marginal benefit curve, and they both have the same x-intercept there. Gesundheit. So draw and label a graph illustrating the impact of a uniform environmental standard on the two plants. A uniform environmental standard, again, would be just a rule to all firms saying you can only pollute this amount. It'll be a fixed amount, and each one will pollute the same. So to show that on the graph, again, you would maybe say, oh, it's 300, and then that means that maybe like the first firm that has the lowest cost, at that level, the savings from an additional unit of pollution is $150 versus this one that has a higher cost at the 300. Their cost would be 300. Their extra benefit from polluting one extra unit would be 300. So it's higher than the other one. So we see that the environmental standard again leads to an inefficient reduction in pollution by, again, having firms that can clean up pollution for a lower cost, polluting the same as those that can pollute, that clean up pollution for the same cost. In the separate graph, we're going to show the effects of imposing an emission tax on the two plants. So again, imposing an emission tax on the two plants. So if the tax, let's say, is 200, then at that point, again, each plant will consider the extra cost of pollution versus the extra benefit of pollution, and their own internal marginal benefit and marginal cost analysis will get them to different amounts of pollution that they're going to engage in, given, again, the cost that they incur to pollute. And so because this firm has a lower cost of cleaning up, they're the ones that are going to pollute less. And then the firm that has the higher cost of cleaning up pollution will pollute more. We'll get the same amount of reduction in pollution, in this case, a total of 600 versus 1,200 if both were left to their own devices without any kind of interaction by the government. And so overall, we get the same result, but it's less costly. And again, that's the same as the situation if the firms were to use the tradable permits to pollute, which I explained last week. So which policy is more economically efficient and why? Again, the emissions tax is the one that is the most efficient. Firm B has a lower cost of reducing emissions by imposing an environmental standard. It leaves the marginal benefit of pollution higher for Plan A than for Plan B. This difference tells us that the same quantity of pollution can be achieved at lower cost by allowing B to pollute more than 300 tons and inducing A to pollute less, which is this result over here. So ideally, with what we covered last week and what I just covered, you get it. But if you don't, go back, go through the lecture, read the book, you'll get it. So when each plant values a unit of pollution equally, there's no way to rearrange pollution reduction. That's this situation over here among the various plants that achieves the optimal quantity of pollution at a lower cost. All right, so that was the case of negative externalities. Let's look at the case of positive externalities with an example. And the example is preserved farmland. So preserved farmland yields both benefits and costs to society. In the absence of government intervention, the farmer who wants to sell his land incurs all the cost of preservation. So if there's a certain amount of natural land that we want to preserve, whoever owns that land is not going to have a benefit to preserve it for the benefit of society that, values a certain amount of the earth untouched by industry, left alone to kind of flourish and sort of be enjoyed as just a natural landscape, right? We have national parks that are the best example of that sort of propensity by society to want to maintain some earth at its most pristine and natural state. So for let's say a farmer that owns natural farmland, the foregone profit to be made from selling the farmland to a developer is too much of a cost for them to be able to just maintain on their own, and therefore they would not choose to preserve the farmland on their own. They would choose to sell the farmland. The benefits of preserved farmland accrue to neighboring residents who have no right to influence how the farmland is disposed of. So again, we can do marginal analysis to kind of figure out what is the optimal amount of preserved farmland and maybe how we could go about getting to that optimal amount. So the marginal social cost of preserved farmland is the additional cost imposed on society by an additional acre of such farmland. So that's, again, a positively sloped curve. Again, representing the extra benefit that society gets from preserving more farmland. It represents the foregone profits that would have accrued to farmers had they sold their land to developers. Sorry, this is the marginal social cost. So as we have more farmland preserved, then that's more farmland that's not being sold that the farmers could earn money on. The line is upward sloping because the more acres are preserved, the higher the market price because the less farmland there is for sale. So supply goes down, you have a higher price. The marginal social benefit curve represents the marginal social benefit of preserved farmland. The curve is downward sloping because as more farmland is preserved, the benefit to society of preserving another acre falls. So, there's only so much we need of this preserved farmland, but there is an amount that we as a society should want. We should want to preserve some of our beautiful earth. So the socially optimal point here occurs at 0 at a price of $10,000 an acre. So the market alone will not provide that optimal amount of preserved farmland. Again, farmers will set their marginal social cost of preservation, which is their foregone profits, at 0 and sell all their acres to developers. Since farmers bear the entire cost of preservation but gain none of the benefits, an inefficiently low quantity of acres will be preserved in the market outcome. So again, we're going to wind up with 0 acres preserved if we just let farmland be allocated by private hands. So again, this is inefficient because at 0 acres preserved, the marginal social benefit of preserving an acre of farmland is $20,000. So again, we as a society do value, in this case, even the first acre of farmland at $20,000. So in order for us to achieve the optimal level of preserved farmland, we need to provide a subsidy. Our government needs to provide a subsidy to the farmer, who needs to be compensated for the amount that they're now going to earn as a result of selling the farmland. And so the subsidy, again, is going to have that weird name, PIGU, but in this case, it's a Piguvian subsidy as opposed to a Piguvian tax. And in this case, and again, it's specific to a positive externality. So it's a payment designed to encourage activities that yield external benefits. The optimal Piguvian subsidy in the figure is equal to the marginal social benefit of preserved farmland at the socially optimal level, Q-opt, which in this case is $10,000 per acre. So if the government were to pay the farmer $10,000 in the form of a Piguvian subsidy, then that amount of farmland would be preserved and society would be better off. All right. Just some quick sort of notes on positive externality in today's economy. In the overall U.S. economy, the most important single source of external benefits is the creation of knowledge. In high-tech industries, innovations by one firm are quickly emulated and improved upon by rival firms. If you take macroeconomics, you'll learn that in the long run, the standard of living of any society that is developed has gotten there by technological progress. Technological progress is achieved by research and development, both in the private sector and in the public sector. So when any kind of technology is innovated, you're going to have what's called technology spillover, and that's going to cause a positive externality. It's the spreading of knowledge across individuals and firms. As more sophisticated ways of understanding the world are developed, that knowledge is spread either legally or illegally. And eventually that informs other innovations, other advancements, which eventually gets us to the state that we're at today, which is a great state. It's not perfect, but it's better than we've ever been in the history of humanity. And we have a long way to go in terms of figuring out all the problems and making sure that everybody in the world is up to the same standard, but we are on the trajectory to get there, and that's a good thing, and we should focus on that. In today's economy, the greatest sources of technological spillovers are major universities and research institutes. So a lot of research and development is done at universities, both public and private, and a lot of that is subsidized by the government. All right, and let's talk about one last form of an externality, which is the network externality, which is something we talked about in the Monopoly chapter as a barrier to entry, as a sort of condition that allows a firm to concentrate their market power by making their product the one that everybody wants to buy. And it's not because their product is unique from a legal standpoint, like nobody else is legally allowed to create it, but because it is the most popular of the version. Like I've mentioned a few times, Microsoft Windows. Anybody can come up with an operating system. Any of you can. You can start selling it, but will anybody buy it? The likelihood is no, because of the network externality that Microsoft Windows gets to enjoy. Everybody uses it. Most programs are designed to work on it. You know, you can create an operating system, but if nobody's using it, if you're the only one using it, then it's not going to have that much value in our society, and it won't be very successful. So in Chapter 13, we explain that a network externality exists whenever the value of a good or service is greater when a larger number of people also use the good or service. When a network externality shares, what it shares with positive and negative externalities is an external effect. One person's actions affect another person's actions. So again, you buying Microsoft Windows, me buying Microsoft Windows, and everybody else buying it that doesn't use Apple makes everybody else want to buy it as well, because again, like they're going to need it to be able to just function normally with PCs. So what are the external benefits of a network externality? So one person's adoption of a good or service extends an external benefit to another person who also adopts that good or service. When a network externality arises from the use of a good or service, it leads to what's called positive feedback, also known as the bandwagon effect. If large numbers of people use it, other people become more likely to use it too. An important way to gain an advantage at the early stages of a market with network externalities is to sell the product cheaply, maybe even at a loss, in order to increase the size of the network of users, which is why you'll often see like new social media pop up without any kind of ads. If they're going to offer, services that are going to cost things, they're not going to do it initially. They're just going to let you use it. You and your friends will start using it. That's how all these Facebook and then ultimately Instagram and Snapchat and all these other apps became so popular, is because, again, like they initially weren't out to make money. They were willing to operate at a loss in order to draw people in order to get you guys talking about it, get you guys telling your friends about it, everybody using it, and then eventually they start bringing in advertising. Instagram just started like popping advertisements into feeds. You guys probably noticed that. Like there's extra ways of these firms now making money, selling you more advanced versions of their apps if you're willing to pay for it, etc. But initially, it's all free. So network externalities present special challenges for antitrust regulators because the antitrust laws do not forbid monopoly, but they by the use of network externalities, but they just prevent monopolization. So again, the Federal Trade Commission and the Justice Department are tasked with kind of monitoring markets and making sure that that there isn't too much power consolidated in any one firm in an industry via them buying up other companies, etc. But with the network externality thing, it becomes murky because it's not something that the firms have any control over, really. Like, even though they might have the strategy to implement a network externality approach in order to try to gain a large market share, there's no real way of them knowing if that's actually going to catch on. And that's the only way it could work, is if people, all of us, actually decide, yeah, this is something we like and we're going to use it a lot. And so for then the government to say, hey, wait, hold on a minute, you're getting too much power, it's sort of a murky area. Like, how do we stop that from happening? Which is why Microsoft, they've been through the process of like being charged as a monopolist, going through the court case analysis, all this very sophisticated long-term sort of analysis that ultimately led to the conclusion that it's unclear if they're a monopoly or not. They might be a monopoly in a sense, but over some products, but overall, like it is the network externality effect that caused them to have the kind of market share they have. So you can't really take that away from them. All right, so that's the externality stuff. Let's jump into this final chapter for the course, the final case of market failure, which is the case of the goods themselves having characteristics that are not ideal for the efficient allocation via markets, what we've been talking about the entire semester. All right, so let's talk about private goods and their relationship to other goods. So what are the characteristics of goods that define them as private and maybe define them as not private? So goods have two characteristics that are essential if a good is to be efficiently provided by a market economy. One is that they are excludable. So the supplier of the good can prevent people who don't pay from consuming it. And the second is that they are rival in consumption. That means that the same unit of a good cannot be consumed by more than one person at the same time. So if you eat a banana, I can't eat that banana. A banana is rival in consumption. But if I watch a television show, you can also watch a television show. So that is not rival in consumption. When a good is both excludable and rival in consumption, it is a private good. And if it is a private good, then it can be allocated via markets the way we've been talking about the entire semester. The demand and supply model, which is a model of perfect competition that we've been talking about. Everything having to do with that model is related to private goods. The decisions made by consumers and firms that we've been studying from the second part of the course on is all reflective of private goods being excludable and rival in consumption. Some goods, though, are not excludable. Non-excludable, so the supplier cannot prevent consumption of the good by people who do not pay for it. Fire protection is one example, right? Like fire departments are there. If we don't stop fires from spreading, they will spread. So Even if you don't pay your taxes, like we're not going to say, oh, we're going to let your house burn and your neighbor's house won't burn. So a fire department that puts out fires before they spread protects the whole city, not just people who have made contributions to the Firemen's Benevolent Association. Some goods, again, are non-rival in consumption if more than one person can consume the same unit of the good at the same time. Like I mentioned, TV shows are non-rival in consumption. You watch Game of Thrones, I watch Game of Thrones, everybody watches Game of Thrones. Your decision to watch a show does not prevent other people from watching the same show. All right, so another type of good that can exist is called, well, before we get there, the goods we've been talking about are private goods, and they are excludable and rival in consumption. So here I have a table with the characteristics rival in consumption, non-rival in consumption for the columns, and excludable and non-excludable in the rows. So again, if it's rival in consumption and excludable, then they are private goods. Wheat is a private good, bathroom fixtures, cars, phones. Now let's say the goods are both non-rival in consumption and non-excludable. In that case, they fall under the category of a public good. So public goods are non-excludable and non-rival in consumption. They include the public sewer system, so public sanitation, national defense. Like we can't tell people that they cannot be protected by our armed forces. So therefore it is non-excludable. And your use of our national forces does not exclude me from also being protected by our national forces, and therefore it is also non-rival in consumption. Another type of good that could exist is called a common resource. A common resource will be rival in consumption, but it will be non-excludable. Clean water in a river is an example. So you've got a clean river. Obviously, like me drinking the river water, eventually, if I'm really thirsty, will drink the entire river, and that will leave you with no river water. So it is rival in consumption, but it's not excludable. Like we cannot stop people from using these things unless they're owned publicly, which is again a solution that has been sort of given to the problem of common resources, where overexploitation can lead to these things eventually kind of drying up. Biodiversity is another. Again, biodiversity, just the extent to which nature has provided all sorts of different animals, plants, etc. They are rival in consumption. If we use them up, they won't be available for other future generations, but they are not excludable. If nature is left to be what it is, just kind of at its pure state in some areas of the world, which it should be, we cannot stop people from going in and maybe even killing the animals or chopping down trees or whatever. Another possibility is that the goods are non-rival in consumption, but they are excludable. So in that case, we have what's called artificially scarce goods. So on-demand movies is an example. So again, movies and television, they're non-rival in consumption. I watch a movie, doesn't mean you can't watch the movie. But they are excludable, right? We can stop folks from watching movies. We can say, well, you have to pay a certain amount for each viewing. Computer software falls into the same category. My use of a computer software does not exclude you from using the computer software, but you can't be stopped from using it without the license. All right, so let's talk about why markets can only supply private goods efficiently. If a good is non-excludable, self-interested consumers won't be willing to pay for it. They will take a free ride on anyone who does pay for it. I mean, it's a pretty sort of standard assumption. It's a pretty clear result too. Like you see it everywhere. Like if we allow just some sort of resource to be available to people without any kind of cost, without any kind of controls, then that resource will be used up. So there is what we call a free rider problem. Even though consumers would benefit from increased production of the good, no one individual is willing to pay for more, and so no producer is willing to supply it. So again, if a good is non-excludable, then no producer will want to supply it because people will be able to get it at unlimited amounts without having to pay for it. So the result is that non-excludable goods suffer from inefficiently low production in a market economy. So left to the production of private producers that are profit-seeking, that's their main motivation. That's the main motivation of firms in our society. They just don't have the incentive to supply those goods. Goods that are excludable but non-rival in consumption, like on-demand movies, suffer from a different kind of inefficiency. As long as a good is excludable, it's possible to earn a profit by making it available only to those that pay. Therefore, producers are willing to supply an excludable good. The marginal cost of letting an additional viewer watch an on-demand movie is zero, though, because it is non-rival in consumption. Like, once you factor in fixed costs and the movie has been produced, each additional unit of that film is basically costs zero to produce, right? The marginal cost of producing an additional viewing of an episode of a show you like is zero, ultimately. So the efficient price to the consumer would then be zero. Price should equal marginal cost at the most efficient market outcome. And so, therefore, again, if the good is excludable but non-rival in consumption, the marginal cost will be zero, and the price should be zero. So individuals should watch movies up to the point where their marginal benefit is zero. But of course, that would mean that suppliers would need to produce that amount, and that means that they would make no profit. And so they, as I'll show in a bit, they will supply less of the good than is optimal in markets. And so you'll have inefficiency as a result of that. So let's look at public goods specifically. Public goods, again, having both the characteristic of being non-rival in consumption and non-excludable. So public goods are provided through a variety of means. The government doesn't always get involved, but in many cases, actually in some cases, a non-governmental solution has been found for, again, what's called the free rider problem that is inherent to the public good. Some public goods are supplied through voluntary contribution. Private donations support a considerable amount of scientific research, but are inefficient to finance huge socially important projects like basic medical research. So, the government will often provide subsidies or even conduct the research themselves. The seeds of the internet were created by the military in the 60s. Like, they essentially started the first networks that established the technology and innovation necessary to eventually, create this World Wide Web that we all get to enjoy. So that's something that was started by a public institution. Sometimes private institutions just don't have the means to invest enough in their R&D to be able to kind of have the big breakthroughs. Some public goods are supplied by self-interested individuals or firms because those who produce them are able to make money in an indirect way. The classic example is broadcast television, which in the United States is supported entirely by advertising. So outside of cable, obviously, there's certain channels that are available for free. There were the channels that were there before there was cable, right? Just in our area, it's channel 2, 4, 5, 7, 9, 11, 13, like a Spanish channel and like a public access channel. I mean, those were the channels. When I grew up, not the entire time, but like at an early time, that was all the channels we had. And then pretty soon we got cable, and then like life changed dramatically. Maybe not in a good way, who knows? That's up to you to decide. But nonetheless, we still do have these broadcast channels. You don't have to have cable. Like, you can just like have like a cheap connection that'll allow you to get reception for the basic channels. And those, again, are provided essentially for free, but the firms that provide them, they're able to make money through advertising. So the downside of such indirect funding is that it skews the nature and quantity of the public goods that are supplied. as well as imposing additional costs on consumers. TV stations show the programs that yield the most advertising revenue, which are not necessarily the programs most people want to see, which is why now we see so much diversity in the amount of cable channels we get, because people do want variety. People want to see very specific things. And so back when we were limited to maybe like 6 or 7 channels, like we weren't all able to enjoy the kind of content we wanted to, because again, the suppliers of such content were mainly interested in those shows that generate the highest income in terms of advertising. So viewers must also endure many commercials. As a result, we had to watch a bunch of commercials too often, and we didn't have any means of fast forwarding through them, unfortunately. Some potentially public goods are deliberately made excludable and therefore subject to charge, like on-demand movies. So again, that's the case of artificially scarce goods, Gesundheit. In the United States, in the United Kingdom, where most television programming is paid for by a yearly license fee assessed on every television owner, which was about £145 or equivalently $245 in 2014, television viewing is made artificially excludable by the use of what's called television detection vans that roam through neighborhoods in an attempt to detect televisions in non-licensed households and find them. So they don't get to enjoy that benefit that we enjoy of having that free broadcast television. There is actually a fee that they have to pay for, in order to enjoy just like basic television channels. But again, if they don't pay it, then these vans can like monitor your neighborhood, figure out who didn't pay, and like, you know, shut off your television anytime. So when suppliers charge a price greater than zero for a non-rival good, like television content, consumers will consume an inefficiently low quantity of that good. So again, like when you have a good that is not a private good, that again might have that characteristic of being non-rival, then the amount of it that will be supplied is not going to be enough to satisfy everybody. And again, it has to do with the fact that the suppliers aren't able to benefit as much from their supply of for everybody. In small communities, a high level of social encouragement or pressure can be brought to bear on people to contribute money or time to provide the efficient level of a public good. Volunteer private fire departments, which depend both on the volunteer services of the firefighters themselves and on contributors from local residents, can be an option when, again, like the public good is not being supplied in the right amount. As communities grow larger and more anonymous, social pressure is increasingly difficult to apply, compelling larger towns and cities to tax residents to provide salaried firefighters for fire protection services. When these other solutions fail, it is up to the government to provide the public good. The most important public goods, national defense, the legal system, disease control, fire protection in large cities, and so on, are provided by government and paid for by taxes. Economic theory tells us that the provision of public goods is one of the crucial roles of government. So, you know, we're not just paying taxes for no reason. There are certain services that cannot be provided in any other way in the scale that we need them to be provided for such a large and complicated society that we live in. And so the government needs to be there. It needs to be properly funded. It needs to be able to play this role of providing public goods to us that need them. You know, we need these institutions that protect us. We need police. We need courts. We need firefighters. We need laws. We need these things. And if we don't have a well-functioning government, then all that goes out the window. But how much of a public good should be provided? In some cases, the provision of a public good is an either-or decision. London would either have a sewer system or not. In most cases, governments must decide not only whether to provide a public good, but also how much of that public good to provide. So imagine a city in which there's only 2 residents, Ted and Alice. Assume that the public good in question is street cleaning. Assume Ted and Alice truthfully tell the government how much they value a unit of the public good. And a unit is equal to 1 street cleaning per month, let's say. So using this information plus information on the cost of providing the good, the government can use marginal analysis to find the efficient level of providing the public good. In the special case of a public good, the marginal social benefit of a unit of the good is equal to the sum of the individual marginal benefits that are enjoyed by all consumers of that unit. Since a public good is non-rival in consumption, Ted's benefit from a street cleaner does not diminish Alice's benefit from the same clean street and vice versa. All right, so the figure illustrates the efficient provision of a public good showing three marginal benefit curves. So we'll see that over here. This is Ted's individual marginal benefit curve. This is Alice's individual marginal benefit curve from additional street cleaning. So, so here, let's say we have Ted would be willing to pay $25 for the first street cleaning. Alice is willing to pay $21 for the first street cleaning. So the marginal social benefit curve is the vertical sum of Ted and Alice's individual marginal benefits. So for one street cleaning for society, which in this very simple example is made up of two individuals, they collectively are willing to pay the vertical sum of each of their marginal benefits. So $46 is what they're willing to pay as a society for that first unit of the street cleaning. Second unit of the street cleaning, Ted values it at $18. Alice values it at $17. So collectively, the marginal social benefit of that second street cleaning is $35. To maximize society's welfare, the government should clean the street up to the level at which the marginal social benefit of an additional cleaning is no longer greater than the marginal social cost. So we're going to assume here that the marginal cost of the street cleaning is $6 per street cleaning. So the marginal cost curve is just going to be a constant line here. So again, marginal analysis. We're dealing with a how much question. How much of this public good should be provided by the government? So obviously, marginal analysis states that the marginal benefit needs to be compared against the marginal cost, and the optimal level will happen at the point where those two are equivalent. So the city in this case should clean the street 5 times per month, which is where the two curves intersect. This example reinforces our understanding of why we cannot rely on individual self-interest to yield provision of an efficient quantity of the public good. Suppose the city did 1 fewer street cleaning than the efficient quantity, and that either Ted or Alice was asked to pay for the last cleaning. So if they did 1 less unit, again, at the efficient level, which is 5, the marginal cost is $6. So if they said, well, we'll do that extra one if either of you pay for it, but we see that each one of them has a valuation of that 6th or that 5th street cleaning, which is less than $6. So each of their individual benefits are less than the overall social cost, and therefore left to individuals to provide the resources to allocate a public good. It's just not going to happen in an efficient way so that society itself benefits in the way that it needs to. So again, self-interested individuals will lead to a less efficient outcome in terms of the allocation of the public goods. So neither one would be willing to pay for it in this case. We encountered a similar situation in our discussion of the positive externalities when we were talking again about the farmland. In that case, the marginal social benefit accruing to all consumers of another unit of the good is greater than the price that the producer receives for that unit. As a result, the market produces too little of the good. In the case of a public good, the individual marginal benefit of a consumer plays the same role as the price received by the producer in the case of the positive externality. So again, so like the collective benefit of the individual groups provide enough of a collective benefit that then allows us to get to that optimal level, which would not happen if the individuals were left to make the decisions on their own. So both create insufficient incentive to provide an efficient amount of the good. In both cases, there's market failure that calls for government intervention. All right, let's look at the case of the common resources. The common resources are the goods in which the goods are non-excludable but they are rival in consumption. So like, again, biodiversity, river water. So a common resource is a good that is not excludable but is rival in consumption. An example is the stock of fish in a limited fishing area, like the fisheries off the coast of New England. Anyone who had a boat could go out to sea and catch a fish. Fish in the sea were a non-excludable good. Yet because the total number of fish is limited, the fish that one person catches are no longer available to be caught by someone else. They are rival in consumption. And so because of that, without any kind of intervention by a non-market entity, the government, then eventually too many fish are going to be caught. There aren't going to be enough fish for people to go around in the long run. So there's an optimal amount of fish that should be caught where people get to enjoy the fish, but then the fish population gets to maintain its size so that we can, extend the benefits of having this type of, in this case, source of food for a long period of time, if not indefinitely. So fish in the sea are rival in consumption. So the problem of overuse is the one that is basically reflective of the common resource. Because common resources are non-excludable, individuals cannot be charged for their use. Yet because they are rival in consumption, individual who uses the unit depletes the resource by making that unit unavailable to others. As a result, the common resource is subject to overuse. In the case of common resource, the marginal social cost of my use of that resource is higher than my individual marginal cost, the cost to me of using an additional unit of the good. So again, like if I don't take into consideration the way it affects everybody else, then the little cost it costs me to go out and fish is not a lot. But if you think about how that impacts the rest of society, the fact that if I just fish an unlimited amount, that will eventually deplete the population of fish, and therefore people will not have enough fish to go around, then the actual cost to society is bigger. So the marginal social cost is greater than my own individual cost. So the figure is going to illustrate the point here. So here we have the price of fish and the quantity of fish. Here's the demand curve for fish, which measures the marginal benefit of fish, the benefit to consumers when an additional unit of fish is caught and consumed, reflected by their willingness to pay. It also shows the supply curve for fish, which measures the marginal cost of production of the fishing industry. We know from chapter 12 that the industry supply curve is the horizontal sum of the individual fisherman's supply curve above their minimum of their average variable cost, equivalent to his or her own individual marginal cost curve. The fishing industry supplies a quantity where its marginal cost is equal to the price. So this is the amount that would be allocated by the market of this common resource. The efficient outcome is to catch the quantity Q op, the quantity of output that equates marginal benefit to marginal social cost, not to the fishing industry's marginal cost of production. So this is the marginal social cost curve, which takes into account the extra cost that society incurs by having the population of fish being depleted. So that is ultimately what needs to be compared against the benefits of additional fish, which is what people get to enjoy by buying fish and consuming it. And that will lead us to the efficient allocation by society standards of the fish, which is going to be much less than the market amount, which will allow the population of fish to be maintained at a level where, again, it will be able to flourish indefinitely and provide sustenance for populations for ideally generations to come. So the market outcome results in the overuse of the common resource. There is a close parallel between the problem of managing a common resource and the problem posed by negative externalities. In the case of a negative externality, the marginal social cost of production is greater than the industry's marginal cost of production, the difference being the marginal extra cost imposed on society. Here, the loss to society arising from a fisherman's depletion of the common resource plays the same role as the external cost plays when there is a negative externality. Many negative externalities, such as pollution, can be thought of as involving a common resource. In that case, it would be clean air. So they're just different ways of sort of looking at the same problem. We have different ways of getting to the same conclusion, which is, again, that the government needs to play a role in allocating these resources, controlling the amount that private firms are using these resources in order to maintain their 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 ability to flourish beyond just our own generation, essentially. All right, so what is the efficient use and maintenance of a common resource? Since common resources pose problems similar to those created by negative externalities, the solutions are also similar. Like activities that generate negative externalities, use of a common resource can be reduced to the efficient quantity by imposing a Pigouvian tax. So again, like we looked at the supply curve, and again, that reflects their own cost of supplying the fish. We saw in the tax chapter, which I think was chapter 6, that if you impose a tax on the seller, then that effectively shifts the supply curve to the left, which is what would get then the suppliers to that marginal social cost curve, and therefore allow us to allocate the common resource to a point where it's again being managed in a better way so that it can sustain future generations. So for example, some countries have imposed congestion charges on those who drive during rush hour, in effect charging them for use of the common resource of city streets. We talked about the negative externality of going out into traffic, and how during traffic, if you decide to go, then you're essentially creating more traffic, creating this negative externality on all the other drivers. Likewise, visitors to national parks must pay a fee, and the number of visitors to any one park is restricted. Again, imposing that extra cost to them so that they don't basically use up the resource by using it up to the point where their marginal cost is equal to zero. So a second way to correct the problem of overuse is to create a system of tradable licenses, we talked about in the last chapter, for the use of the common resource, much like the system designs to address negative externalities. The policymaker issues the number of licenses that correspond to the efficient level of use of the good. So in the case of the fishing, there's only a certain amount of fishing licenses that are made available. People have to pay for that, which increases their marginal cost of fish. And it also limits the amount of people that can fish, which then allows, again, the population, its integrity to be maintained. Making the licenses tradable ensures that the right to use the good is allocated efficiently. If the licenses are traded, then those who value them the most will pay, and those who don't won't. And those who don't will not fish. So those who end up using the good, those willing to pay the most for the license, are those who gain the most from its use. The most natural solution is simply to assign property rights. So in the absence of any kind of effective public policy to be able to allocate these resources, then maybe it is wise to just have these public resources be put in private hands. So a common resource that, again, is non-rival in consumption, is rival in consumption but non-excludable. If you make it excludable, then it becomes a private good. Obviously, that's not the best solution. We don't want the world to be in private hands, because even though there might be well-intentioned individuals owning the resource initially, you never know what will happen later on. Like you have a change of regime like we do now with our government. You have people that were interested in maintaining the integrity of the government, helping as many people as possible within our society, and now that power was transferred over into the hands of those that are mainly interested in benefiting those who are the wealthiest in our society, and they are doing everything they can to get their hands on as much of the public resources as possible so that they can overuse them, so that eventually they will be depleted. And so it's not the best solution. So if it is the only solution, then it's an option. So at a fundamental level, common resources are subject to overuse because nobody owns them. The essence of ownership of a good, the property right over the good, is that you can limit who can and cannot use the good, as well as how much of it can be used. When a good is non-excludable, in a very real sense, no one owns it because property rights cannot be informed, and consequently no one has an incentive to use it efficiently. So one way to correct the problem of overuse is to make the good excludable and assign property rights over to someone. The good now has an owner who has an incentive to protect the value of the good. All right, and finally, let's talk about artificially scarce goods. So essentially, from this chapter, you should just understand the difference between the four, understand like the characteristics that define one versus another, and just have a broad sort of understanding of why it is that this is an example of market failure, why the markets, in the way that we've been talking about, are not able to allocate the goods properly. That's basically what I've been talking about this entire lecture. All right, so for the artificially scarce good, again, artificially scarce goods are goods that are non-rival in consumption but are excludable. So an artificially scarce good can be like television shows. As we've already seen, on-demand movies are a familiar example. The marginal cost to society of allowing an individual to watch the movie is zero because one person's viewing doesn't interfere with another person's viewing. Yet Netflix and companies like it prevent an individual from seeing on-demand movies if he or she has not paid. Goods like computer software, MP3s, which are valued for the information they embody and are sometimes called information goods, are also artificially scarce. As we've already seen, markets will supply artificially scarce goods because they are excludable. Therefore, the producers can charge people for consuming them. Since they are non-rival in consumption, though, the marginal cost of an individual's consumption is zero. The price that the supplier of an artificially scarce good charges exceeds marginal cost. And so that's where the inefficiency comes in with an artificially scarce good. The efficient price is equal to the marginal cost of zero. The good is artificially scarce and consumption of the good is inefficiently low. Unless the producer can somehow earn revenue for producing and selling the good, he or she will be unwilling to produce it. So again, a lot of this has to do with the willingness of producers to actually produce these things. And so if they don't have the incentive to do so because the goods don't have those private good characteristics, excludability and rival in consumption, then there's going to be a disconnect between what should happen and what actually does happen. So this outcome leaves society even worse off than it would otherwise be with positive but inefficiently low consumption. So here's the demand for the like on-demand movies. The optimal amount that should be supplied is this amount here. But in order for any firm to even want to supply it, they're going to want to make some money. So they will charge a per unit fee which will exceed marginal cost. And anytime price is above marginal cost, we're going to have inefficiency. We're going to have deadweight loss. And so this amount of mutually beneficial transactions will not occur. So the figure illustrates the loss in total surplus caused by artificial scarcity. We're going to get some deadweight loss there. The demand curve shows the quantity of on-demand movies watched at any given price. The marginal cost of allowing an additional person to watch the movie is zero, so the efficient quantity of the movie should be Q-opt. Netflix charges a positive price, in this case, let's say $4, to unscramble the signal, and as a result, only that Q market demand movies will be watched, which again is inefficiently low. All right, folks, we're done. We're done with Econ 160. Congratulations, you made it to the very end. I hope that you will carry with you some of like the broad basic insights that you gain in this course. Remember, it's not just about memorizing stuff for exams. It's about understanding how markets work. Why different markets operate differently. What are the factors that cause prices to be higher in one market versus another? What causes competition to be less in one market versus another? How do taxes affect markets? How does international trade work, and how does that affect prices and markets? Like, all these things are things that if you carry with you, regardless of what you wind up doing in your lives, will serve you as far as like you just being a more understanding person of how the world works, your role within it, your role as a consumer, maybe as a producer, who knows? Like, it's important for you to just kind of learn some of the stuff that you cover in all these courses, regardless of what you might think of them, as far as like, the major you're going to wind up taking or whatever. Anyway, regardless of what you wind up doing, I wish you all the very best. And again, just like hang in there. It's about a week and a half of really hard work and dedication, but it's worth your time. It will lead to like positive results for you, and that's all I want for you. So I'll see you guys a week from Thursday at 12:45. Take care.